example of Kitover and then mercifully have become interested in the practice of what in general is called meditation, contemplation, according to models that have been followed for centuries in Asia. And one of the reasons for this is that the religions which are generic to the West, Judaism, Christianity, and even Islam, are more talkative than contemplative. In other words, when you go to a church service, if you're a Protestant, you expect the main event to be the sermon, and also the minister's prayer, offered more or less spontaneously, telling God how to control the universe. And if you're a Catholic, you expect the Mass, which has now been translated into English so that everybody can supposedly understand it, and has thereby been degraded from what Hindus would call mantra, the use of sound for meditation, to a merely instructive affair. We are very verbose in our religion. And because of that, it's all words, words, words. And only rarely does this help us to transform our consciousness. And this is more and more people are realizing is the important thing. Because we discover this, that our extremely powerful technologies are magnifiers or amplifiers. When we do what we will, what we think we desire with technology, we are, as it were, blowing up our image of ourselves to enormous proportions. And many of us are beginning to realize that we don't like it. We discover ourselves to be beings that are hostile to the environment and that are bent on dominating it to the point of destruction. That we don't feel at home in the universe. We feel that our skin, at the very least, is a boundary between a palpitating, sensitive consciousness that's terrified of what's outside the skin and terrified of a good deal that's inside it, like bacteria and cancer cells, weak arteries, cholesterol, what have you. So we have this strange thing that Lancelot White called the European dissociation, the feeling of oneself as a prisoner, involuntarily so, in a hostile world that does not give a damn about our egos. And therefore, when news comes from all about, whether it be from the Orient or whether it be from experiments with psychedelic drugs, when news comes that this feeling of our own existence may be a hallucination, people prick up their ears and would like to know, is there some other mode of consciousness which one can be in, which is not this alienated mode? Because we feel, I think many of us, very, very strongly, that if there is such a place, we would like to be there. That, of course, entails difficulties, which we should go into. But this is the starting point of the fascination for yoga, for Zazen, and also for the Taoist forms of meditation, which are much less known. But there arise problems about this when we are going to convey these disciplines to Western people. Because Western people who are interested in things of this kind are apt to be very interested. Whereas on the other hand, in cultures where things of this kind have been known for thousands of years, there is a tendency for them to become rather rotish. And therefore, the way of teaching these disciplines, which many Asian teachers use, are designed not for mature adults, but for relatively young people who are not interested in learning. In other words, when a kind of religion, let's take the case of Zen Buddhism, or in Chinese it is called Chan, when after some years pious people have followed these disciplines and learned to enjoy them, they have a way of telling their children that you ought to enjoy this too. See? And we would like you to go to the monastery. And furthermore, when there's the superstitious feeling that raising a son to be a monk or a priest redounds to one's own good merit in future lives, the more sons you send into the priesthood, the better. It's the same in Catholic countries. It was the same among the British in the Anglican Church during the 18th century, when the first son of the family went into the law, because he had then a good chance of being a successful politician. The second son went into the army, and the third son went into the priesthood. And it is a matter of fact. And they had no real interest in religion. They weren't really curious. It was something they were studying out of filial duty to their parents. And especially in these days in Japan, when in order to inherit your father's temple, you have to go to the monastery and take the Zen training. It becomes a matter of some urgency. So you have a lot of unwilling young men, sometimes young women, in the nunneries, learning the meditative disciplines under the supervision of ecclesiastical taskmasters, who are everywhere in the world exactly the same. I attended, from the ages of 13 to 17, an ecclesiastical boys' boarding school in England. I can assure you I've had enough of it. We were very sternly disciplined in the same way as Zen monks are disciplined in Japan today. And it just strikes me as funny that I have what I call the aching legs school of Zen, in which one sits in Zazen for an unnecessarily long time until one gets paralyzed. And then people come back from Japan or from anywhere and brag about how their legs hurt, as if it was some extremely esoteric discipline. And you know, they bang them about with boards on the shoulders. And like in England, they swipe them on the bottoms with canes. And it's all the same old story. And I think we need to go beyond this and develop a certain maturity towards the practice of meditation that is not based on all this boys' boarding school business. But it's very difficult to make people who have been brought up in that system see the point. Because they say, well, we got it this way, and that's the way you have to go in order to get it. So we have discussed this matter, and we feel that there can be an approach which does not insult the dignity of interested Western adults. Well, some people love to have their dignity insulted because they think it's good for them, because it's going to subdue their egoistic pride. But nothing is more egoistic than the project of subduing your egoistic pride. We could read it straight out of Zhuangzi in the dialogue between Lao Tzu and Confucius, or, you know, it's an apocryphal dialogue. Zhuangzi was a great humorist, and he used the most outrageous stories and examples to illustrate his points. And so he put into the mouth of Confucius all sorts of things that Confucius would never have dreamed of saying, but he also arranges a dialogue between Lao Tzu and Confucius in which Confucius gets the wrong end of the stick, where Lao Tzu talks to him and asks him, what is your teaching? And he says it is charity and duty to one's neighbor and absence of self. Well, he says, sir, you are causing great disruption in the empire. Is not your elimination of self, a positive manifestation of self. You are like somebody beating a drum in search of a fugitive. I mean, we would say it is like the police about to raid a whorehouse with the sirens on, so that everybody hears them coming and runs away. You see? So in the same way, when you go after with a project to eliminate your selfishness, nothing could be more in the nature of spiritual pride. And you will work on it, and the more you work on it and get uptight and stiff, the more your spiritual bulge increases. So in the Taoist doctrines, there is a principle called Wu Wei. And this means, Wu means none, or not, no, negation. Wei has a combination of meanings. It can mean action, making, but the best translation I have found for it is forcing. And so Wu Wei is the principle of not forcing in anything that you do. Now we know when we watch any performance of an artist, be it a dancer or an actor or a musician, we know immediately when the performance is forced. And we say it doesn't ring true, it's too artificial, it doesn't seem to be natural. Many people who study the Taoist doctrines think that Wu Wei means do nothing, in the sense of laissez-faire, be lazy, always be passive. It doesn't mean that. There is a time for action. When you study judo, you use muscle only at the right moment. When your opponent is hopelessly overextended and off balance, and you add a little muscle to it and you throw him across the room. But only then. You never use muscle at the wrong moment. For as Shakespeare knew perfectly well, there is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at its flood, leads on to fortune. And so Wu Wei is based on knowledge of the tide, the drift of things. Get with it. Wu Wei is the art of sailing rather than the art of rowing. So, if you say one of the most famous sayings in the Lao Tzu is superior virtue has no intention to be virtuous, and thus is virtue. Inferior virtue cannot let go of virtuosity, and thus is not. So one could also say, the real Wu Wei is not intentional, and so isn't. But inferior Wu Wei so tries to be Wu Wei that it isn't. In other words, this is saying Wu Wei is not a matter of cultivated passivity, or even of cultivated spontaneity. Because there are people who think that they are released, that they have realized that they are the Tao, as all of us in fact are, or that you are, to put it into Vedanta terms, every one of us is the Brahman, the eternal self of the universe, beyond all description or classification or thought. You say, okay, baby, I'm that. Now I'm going to have a ball. Well, what kind of a ball do they have? Well, what they do is they look up the rules on which society runs and do the opposite. Well, that's still running by the rules of society. And it's the mirror image in reverse. That's not spontaneity. You have to be able to realize that you don't know what you really want until you are very quiet. And it tells you. quote Jesus, unless you become again as a child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. And if you read the Bible, incidentally, which is a very dangerous book, as I'm going to be demonstrating in Playboy this December, but understand heaven in a very literal sense, space. See, we are in heaven now because the earth is a spaceship and heaven is space. What is called in Chinese Gun, Japanese Gu, the void. That's what is important. That most of us don't know this. Even Shakespeare has one of his characters saying, "Oh, that this all too solid flesh would melt." But do you know you're much more space than you are anything else? If the ponderable, I won't say matter, the ponderable whatever in your bodies were condensed and all put together, it would be smaller than the point of a pin. Anyway, somebody once said, even a bishop is 80% water. We are airy nothings. So space is somehow very, very fundamental. We're going to do this. But you understand that heaven is space. And all those references in those nursery rhymes that we learn as children that were the kings about heaven. We're talking about thrones and crowns and harps and streets of glass. Crystal. Transparency. Space. It comes down to space. Space. Nobody can define, nobody can imagine. Appears to be nothing. That's the foundation of the universe. But you have to become again as a child to see that. Now you don't go back to your childhood. What were the fascinating things? What's out there? What's beyond the stars? How long does it go on? And Mama said, it goes on always and always and always. The child wonders, excited, that this is something that never ends. Then the child asks about time. How long ago is long ago? Well, the Bible says that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Well, what did God do before he did that? Well, one person said he sat up thinking punishments in hell for people who ask silly questions. But still, that's only a joke. And the child thinks, oh God, going back and back and back. Never begin. So in the same way, we think about death. Go to sleep and never wake up. Never. Why, it would be as if you never had existed. Not only you, but everything else. Which is, of course, the way things were before you were born. You just done it backwards. You know, how about waking up after having never gone to sleep? That's quite a fraud. There's something fishy about it. Ichthys, Jesus Christus, Dios hier. So we get a funny feeling when we think those questions really through. Very funny. And children, you see, love to get into that funny feeling. Children do all kinds of weird things. They like to spin around as fast as possible, so they got to the suddenly the whole ground gets tilting. You know this thing with their eyes. And they make faces and test out their bodies in all sorts of funny ways. Because they know from the beginning that the world is weird. Strange thing. Because everybody knows what it's all about. Only they won't admit it. Being brought up is being taught not to admit it. But you know very well what's going on. But in order to find out once more as an adult, you have to become again as a child. So what does that involve? Ladies and gentlemen, would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? First of all your philosophical and religious views, all your logic. Because I say check it at the door advisedly, because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of the experiment, you temporarily suspend it. And view what is as if you didn't even know how to talk. Red is not red, blue is not blue. Hard is not hard, soft is not soft. Male is not male, female is not female. There is just this jazz. It will not be possible to propel yourselves into this way of looking at things, because what Buddhists call habit energy is going on. And as I talk to you, you will find yourselves thinking in a compulsive and habitual way. This is red, this is green, this is something, this is nothing, this is solid, this is space. All right, now treat those thoughts that are going on in your head in exactly the same way as if they were. See? That's all they are. Like shapes in the spray as the sea breaks on the rocks. Now, please don't get agitated that this is an anti-intellectual point of view, that this is undermining the value of logic and reason and so on. We'll bring all that back later when we need it. But just for the time being, let's simplify. Close your eyes. Listen. What is? What is you really and truly? Honest. Here. Don't make. Just as if it were music. That's it. Can you hear the past? Can you hear the future? Can you hear the listener? Where did the sound come from? Ears alone, things that on another hand that can tell you the truth. You may be talking to yourselves. Don't try to address it, as I said, just disregard it. that happens, it's like an illusion. Really listen. Keep that sound. Now that's the easiest way to begin into meditation. For most people. We're all different, of course, and there are different things for different people's temperaments. But I find it simplest to illustrate it by hearing without comment, so that you can get into tune with what is. You can't really get out of tune with it, because you didn't know that. Maybe somebody did. The art of meditation is a way of getting into touch with reality. And the reason for it is that most civilized people are out of touch with reality because they confuse the world as it is with the world as they think about it, and talk about it, and describe it. For on the one hand, there is the real world, and on the other, a whole system of symbols about that world which we have in our minds. These are very, very useful symbols. All civilization depends on them. But like all good things, they have their disadvantages. And the principal disadvantage of symbols is that we confuse them with reality, just as we confuse money with actual wealth. And our names about ourselves, our ideas of ourselves, our images of ourselves with ourselves. Now, of course, reality, from a philosopher's point of view, is a dangerous word. The philosopher will ask me, what do I mean by reality? Am I talking about the physical world of nature? Or am I talking about a spiritual world? Or what? And to that I have a very simple answer. When we talk about the material world, that is actually a philosophical concept. So in the same way, if I say that reality is spiritual, that's also a philosophical concept. And reality itself is not the concept. Reality is and we won't give it a name. Now it's amazing what doesn't exist in the real world. For example, in the real world, there aren't any things, nor are there any events. That doesn't mean to say that the real world is a perfectly featureless blank. It means that it is a marvelous system of wiggles in which we describe things and events in the same way as we would project images on a Rorschach plot or pick out particular groups of stars in the sky and call them constellations, as if they were separate groups of stars. Well, they're groups of stars in the mind's eye, in our system of concepts. They are not out there as constellations already grouped in the sky. So in the same way, the difference between myself and all the rest of the universe is nothing more than an idea. It is not a real difference. And meditation is the way in which we come to feel our basic inseparability from the whole universe. And what that requires is that we shut up. That is to say, that we become interiorly silent and cease from the interminable chatter that goes on inside our skulls. Because you see, most of us think compulsively all the time. That is to say, we talk to ourselves. I remember when I was a boy, we had a common saying, talking to yourself is the first sign of madness. Now, obviously, if I talk all the time, I don't hear what anyone else has to say. And so in exactly the same way, if I think all the time, that is to say, if I talk to myself all the time, I don't have anything to think about except thoughts. And therefore I'm living entirely in the world of symbols, and am never in relationship with reality. All right, now that's the first basic reason for meditation. But there is another sense, and this is going to be a little bit more difficult to understand, why we could say that meditation doesn't have a reason, or doesn't have a purpose. And in this respect, it's unlike almost all other things that we do, except perhaps making music and dancing. Because when we make music, we don't do it in order to reach a certain point, such as the end of the composition. If that were the purpose of music, to get to the end of the piece, then obviously the fastest players would be the best. And so likewise, when we're dancing, we are not aiming to arrive at a particular place on the floor, as we would be if we were taking a journey. When we dance, the journey itself is the point. When we play music, the playing itself is the point. And exactly the same thing is true in meditation. Meditation is the discovery that the point of life is always arrived at in the immediate moment. And therefore, if you meditate for an ulterior motive, that is to say, to improve your mind, to improve your character, to be more efficient in life, you've got your eye on the future and you are not meditating. Because the future is a concept. It doesn't exist. As the proverb says, tomorrow never comes. There is no such thing as tomorrow. There never will be, because time is always now. And that's one of the things we discover when we stop talking to ourselves and stop thinking. We find there is only a present, only an eternal now. So it's funny then, isn't it, that one meditates for no reason at all, except we could say for the enjoyment of it. And here I would interpose the essential principle that meditation is supposed to be fun. It's not something you do as a grim duty. The trouble with religion, as we know it, is that it is so mixed up with grim duties. We do it because it's good for you. It's a kind of self-punishment. Where meditation, when correctly done, has nothing to do with all that. It's a kind of digging the present. It's a kind of grooving with the eternal now. And brings us into a state of peace where we can understand that the point of life, the place where it's at, is simply here and now. Well, now, in the art of meditation, there are various props, supports. One thing that we are going to use as a means of stilling chatter in the mind is pure sound. And for that reason, it's useful to have a gong. This is a Japanese Buddhist gong made of bronze and shaped like a bowl. Or you can use your own voice. Another prop in meditation is the use of incense. And that is because the sense of smell is our repressed sense. And because it's our repressed sense, it has a very powerful influence on us. And therefore, we associate certain smells with certain states of mind. And so the smell of incense is associated with peace and contemplation. And so it's advantageous to burn incense in meditation. The other prop is a string of beads. And these beads are used in meditation for an unconscious method of timing yourself. Instead of looking at a watch, you move a bead each time you breathe in and out, so that at a certain rate, you see, there are always 108 beads on the rosary. And when you get to slow breathing, halfway around the rosary is about 40 minutes. And that is the usual length of time for which one sits in meditation, because otherwise you get uncomfortable and you get stiff legs and problems of that kind. Now then, the other thing, first of all, we have to go into is, how does one sit in meditation? You can sit any way you want. You can sit in a chair, or you can sit like I'm sitting, which is the Japanese way of sitting, or you can sit in the lotus posture, which is more difficult, which is cross-legged, with the feet on the thighs, soles upwards. And the younger you start with in life, the easier you'll find it to do. Or you could just sit cross-legged on a raised cushion above the floor. Now the point of this is that if you keep your back erect, I don't mean stiff like this, nor slumped like this, but just easily erect, you are centered and easily balanced, and you have a feeling of being thoroughly rooted to the ground. And that sort of physical stability is very important for the avoidance of distraction and generally feeling settled. Here and now, j'y suis, j'y reste, as the French say. I'm here and I'm going to stay. So now, the easiest way to get into the meditative state is to begin by listening. If you simply close your eyes and allow yourself to hear all the sounds that are going on around you, just listen to the general hum and buzz of the world as if you were listening to music. Don't try to identify the sounds you're hearing. Don't put names on them. Simply allow them to play with your eardrums. And let them go. In other words, you could put it, let your ears hear whatever they want to hear. Don't judge the sounds. There are no, as it were, proper sounds or improper sounds. It doesn't matter if somebody coughs or sneezes or drops something. It's all just sound. And if I am talking to you right now and you're doing this, I want you to listen to the sound of my voice just as if it were noise. Don't try to make any sense out of what I'm saying, because your brain will take care of that automatically. You don't have to try to understand anything. Just listen to the sound. As you pursue that experiment, you will very naturally find that you can't help naming sounds, identifying them, that you will go on thinking, that is to say, talking to yourself inside your head automatically. But it's important that you don't try to repress those thoughts by forcing them out of your mind, because that will have precisely the same effect as if you were trying to smooth rough water with a flat iron. You're just going to disturb it all the more. What you do is this. As you hear sounds coming up in your head, thoughts, you simply listen to them as part of the general noise going on, just as you would be listening to the sound of my voice, or just as you would be listening to cars going by or to birds chattering outside the window. So look at your own thoughts as just noises. And soon you will find that the so-called outside world and the so-called inside world come together. They are a happening. Your thoughts are a happening, just like the sounds going on outside. And everything is simply a happening, and all you're doing is watching it. Now, in this process, another thing that is happening that is very important is that you're breathing. And as you start meditation, you allow your breath to run just as it wills. In other words, don't do at first any breathing exercise, but just watch your breath breathing the way it wants to breathe. And notice a curious thing about this. You say in the ordinary way, I breathe, because you feel that breathing is something that you are doing voluntarily, just in the same way as you might be walking or talking. But you will also notice that when you are not thinking about breathing, your breathing goes on just the same. So the curious thing about breath is that it can be looked at both as a voluntary and an involuntary action. You can feel on the one hand, I am doing it, and on the other hand, it is happening to me. And that is why breathing is a most important part of meditation, because it is going to show you, as you become aware of your breath, that the hard and fast division that we make between what we do on the one hand and what happens to us on the other is arbitrary. So that as you watch your breathing, you will become aware that both the voluntary and the involuntary aspects of your experience are all one happening. Now that may at first seem a little scary, because you may think, well, am I just the puppet of a happening, the mere passive witness of something that's going on completely beyond my control? Or on the other hand, am I really doing everything that's going on? Well, if I were, I should be God. And that would be very embarrassing, because I would be in charge of everything. That would be a terribly responsible position. The truth of the matter, as you will see it, is that both things are true. You can see it that everything is happening to you, and on the other hand, you're doing everything. For example, it's your eyes that are turning the sun into light. It's the nerve ends in your skin that are turning electric vibrations in the air into heat and temperature. It's your eardrums that are turning vibrations in the air into sound. And in that way, you are creating the world. But when we're not talking about it, when we're not philosophizing about it, then there is just this happening, this, and we won't give it a name. Now then, when you breathe for a while, just letting it happen, and not forcing it in any way, you will discover a curious thing, that without making any effort, you can breathe more and more deeply. In other words, supposing you simply are breathing out, and breathing out is important because it's the breath of relaxation. That's when we say, phew, and heave a sigh of relief. So when you are breathing out, you get the sensation that your breath is falling out. Dropping, dropping, dropping out, with the same sort of feeling you have as if you were settling down into an extremely comfortable bed. And you just get as heavy as possible and let yourself go. And you let your breath go out in just that way. And when it's thoroughly, comfortably out and it feels like coming back again, you don't pull it back in, you let it fall back in, letting your lungs expand, 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 until they feel very comfortably full. And you wait a moment and let it stay there, and then once again, you let it fall out. And so in this way, you will discover that your breath gets quite naturally easier and easier, and slower and slower, and more powerful. So that with these various aids, listening to sound, listening to your own interior feelings and thoughts, just as if they were something going on, not something you are doing, but just happenings, and watching your breath as a happening that is neither voluntary nor involuntary. You are simply aware of these basic sensations. Then you begin to be in the state of meditation. But don't hurry anything. Don't worry about the future. Don't worry about what progress you're making. Just be entirely content to be aware of what is. Don't be terribly selective, particular, say, I should think of this and not of that. Just watch whatever is happening. Now then, to make this somewhat easier, to have the mind free from discursive verbal thinking, sound or chanted sound is extremely useful. If you, for example, simply listen to the gong, and let that sound be the whole of your experience. It's quite simple, it requires no effort. And then along with that, especially if you don't have a gong, we could use what are called in the Sanskrit language mantra. Mantra are chanted sounds which are used not so much for their meaning as for the simple tone. And they go along with that easy kind of slow breath. One of the basic mantras is, of course, the sound That sound is used because if you spell it out, A-U-M, it runs from the back of your throat to your lips, and therefore it contains the whole range of the voice. And for that reason, it represents the total energy of the universe. This word is called the pranava, the name for the ultimate reality, for the which, than which there is no witcher. And so, in this way then, if you chant it, and it's varied like this. And you can keep that up for quite quite a long time, and eventually you will find, as you go on chanting, that the words of the chant will simply have become pure sound. And you won't be thinking about it. You won't have any images about the sound going on in your mind. You will simply become completely absorbed in sound, and therefore you will find yourself living in an eternal now in which there is no past, and there is no future, and there is no thing called difference between what you are as knower and what you are as the known, between yourself and the world of nature outside you. It all becomes one doing, one happening. Now, in addition to those slow-moving chants, you may find it, according to your temperament, easier to do a fast-moving chant. These have a sort of rhythm to them that is absorbing. Say, a chant that many of you have heard that goes, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And it doesn't matter what it means. Actually, Krishna and Rama are the names of Hindu divinities. But that's not the point. The point is just to get with that thing that is running. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, and so on. And if you're a Christian or a Jew and you feel more inclined to use a meditation word that is more congenial to you, you can use, say, Alleluia, Alleluia. Or if you're a Mohammedan,
Chitakasha Dhyana. Chitakasha Dhyana is a meditation on the sky. Meditation on the sky is meditation on emptiness. The clear blue sky is intensely empty. To meditate on it is to enter into clarity. Choose a day when the sky is clear blue, cloudless and vast. In a quiet place, simply lie on your back and start looking at the sky. Don't blink, even if your eyes begin to water. Your eyes will begin to hurt. Ignore the pain. Once the tears have cleansed your eyes, it will become easier to see. Don't start thinking about the sky. Don't start thinking about how wonderful and blue the sky is looking. The moment you start thinking about it, you separate yourself from the sky. Do not think about the sky. Simply enter into the sky. Just by looking, feel the clarity of the sky. Be aware of the purity of the blue sky. Enter into that clarity. Move deep into the sky. Go on looking deeper and deeper into the sky, as if you are looking for something further and further in its depth. Keep on staring till you become one with it. Not till you think you have become one with it. When you have become one with it, you will know for yourself. It may take an hour or more. Don't stop. Don't let your attention wander. Don't take your eyes off the sky. Now close your eyes. If the union has really happened, you will feel the sky inside yourself. You will feel that the sky has entered you. Your mind will drop away. Your thoughts will drop away. Just remain in that sky. In the beginning, it will be only for a few moments. But with practice, you will experience this state for longer and longer periods. With a clear sky inside you, you will experience a no mind. Sit or lie down in a comfortable position facing the sky. In a relaxed way, gaze deeply into the sky without blinking. quality of the sky. sky. Enter into that clarity. Enter into that purity. Be aware of the purity of the blue sky. Enter into that clarity. Enter into that purity.
steep.
Enter deeply into the sky.
I can't believe this. This is so funny.
Keep on gazing till you become one with it. Continue to gaze till you become one with the sky. into the vastness of the sky and become one with it.
alien to our thought to consider all that as you yourself. Because you see, we have such a myopic view of what oneself is. It's as if, in other words, we selected how much experience is really to be regarded as me. As if you focused your attention on certain restricted areas of the whole panorama of things that you experience, and say, I will take sides with that much of it. Now, we come here right at the start to an extremely important principle, which is the different points of view you get when you change your level of magnification. That is to say, you can look at something with a microscope and see it a certain way. You can look at it with the naked eye and see it in a certain way. You look at it with a telescope and you see it in another way. Now, which level of magnification is the correct one? Well, obviously, they're all correct. They're just different points of view. You can, for example, look at a newspaper photograph under a magnifying glass, and where with the naked eye you will see a human face, with the magnifying glass you will just see a profusion of dots, rather meaninglessly scattered. But as you stand away from that connection of dots, which all seem to be separate and apart from each other, they suddenly arrange themselves into a pattern. And you see that these individual dots add up to some kind of sense. Now you'll see at once from this illustration that maybe you, when you take a myopic view of yourself, as most of us do, but you may add up to some kind of sense that is not apparent to you in your ordinary consciousness. When we examine our bloodstreams under a microscope, we see there's one hell of a fight going on. All sorts of microorganisms are chewing each other up. And if we got overly fascinated with our view of our own bloodstreams in the microscope, we should start taking sides, which would be fatal, because the health of our organism depends on the continuance of this battle. What is, in other words, conflict at one level of magnification is harmony at a higher level. And could it possibly be, therefore, that we, with all our problems, conflicts, neuroses, sicknesses, political outrages, wars, tortures, and everything that goes on in human life, are a state of conflict which can be seen in a larger perspective as a situation of harmony? Well, it is claimed, you see, that some human beings have broken through to that vision, that they've slipped somehow or other into states of consciousness where they see the apparent disintegration and disorganization of everyday life as the functioning of a totality which at its level is completely harmonious. And you could say, aha, at last I see, I got the point. I've seen how all this makes sense. But what this insight depended upon was your overcoming the illusion that space separates things. That is to say, the space, the interval between your body and mine, the interval created by birth at one end and death at the other, and then after somebody's death, then somebody else's birth. These are events with intervals between them. And normally we regard these intervals in time and these intervals in space as having no importance, no function. We tend to see the universe itself as really consisting in all the stars and galaxies. That's what it is. That's what we notice. But the space in which all this happens is sort of written off as something that isn't really there. But what one has to realize is that the space is an essential function of the things in the space. After all, you can't have separate stars unless there is a space around. Eliminate the space and you will see you couldn't have this phenomenon at all. And vice versa. You couldn't have the space. They wouldn't be there in any sense whatsoever if there weren't the bodies in it. So the bodies in the space and the space are two aspects of a single continuum. They're related together in exactly the same way as a back and a front. And you just don't get one without the other. So the moment you see that intervals, that space is connective, you can understand at once how you are not just to be exclusively defined as a flash of consciousness that occurs between two eternal darknesses, which is the popular common sense view which Western man has of his own life. That you consider that in the darkness that comes before your birth, there was no you, and in the eternal darkness that follows your death, there is likewise no you. And I'm going to discuss these matters not by appealing to any special spooky knowledge, as if I had been traveling on the higher planes and knew all my previous incarnations and therefore could tell you authoritatively that you are much more than this individuality. I'm going to do it on a basis of complete common sense, that everybody has access to the facts. And that just what you have to realize is that life is a pattern of immense complexity. And what you call yourself as a living organism, say, I am my whole body at the very least. Now, what is that body? That body is recognizable, and I recognize my friends when I meet them again, with luck, and you recognize me. Although the last time any of you saw me, I was absolutely something entirely different from what I am now. Just as the flame of a candle is never a constant. The flame of a candle is a stream of hot gas. Only you say the flame of the candle as if it were a constant. Well, it is a recognizably constant pattern. The spear-shaped outline of the flame and its coloration is a constant pattern. But in exactly the same way, we are all constant patterns. And that's all we are. The only thing constant about us at all is the doing rather than the being. It's the way we behave, the way we dance. Only there's no we that dances. There's just the dancing. Just as the flame is the streaming of hot gas, just as a whirlpool in a river is a whirling of streaming water. There is no thing that whirlpools. There is the whirlpool. And in the same way, each one of us is a very, very delightfully complex undulation of the energy of the whole universe. Only by our process of miseducation, we've been deprived of the knowledge of that fact. Not as if there was someone to blame for this, because it's always with our own tacit consent. Because life is basically a game of hide and seek. Because life is pulsation, on and off. Here it is, and now it isn't. And by being this pulsation, we know it's there. See, you don't know what you mean by on unless you know what you mean by off. That's why when we want to awaken someone, we knock at the door. Not enough to slam the door once with your fist and make a big noise, but you keep up a pulsation, because that by on and offness attracts attention. All life, you see, is this flickering in and out. Only there are enormous rhythms in it. There are very fast flickering ins and outs, like the reaction of light upon our eyes, such that if I take a lighted cigarette in the dark and I spin it, you will see a circle of fire. Because the reflection of that cigarette tip on your retina lasts, it endures. Just in the same way as on a radar screen. An image stays a little while until it's revivified by another round. So in that way, you see, you notice continuity. And in the same way then, you notice the continuity of a light, because although, like say, with an arc lamp is actually a flickering light. And that's why they don't allow arc lights to be used in any shop where there's a circular saw moving. Because sometimes the flickering speed of the arc light so synchronizes with the turning speed of the teeth on the blade that the teeth look as if they're not moving. And so anybody who might put his hand on the blade would have it chopped off, thinking it was a stone. So in this way, very fast impulses are looked upon as constant. And we see where there are fast impulses a solid thing. When you look at the blade of a propeller or an electric fan, the separated 4 or 3 blades become a solid disc, and you cannot throw an egg through it. Well, so in exactly the same way, you can't put your finger through a rock, because the rock is moving too fast for your finger to go through. That's the meaning of the whole phenomenon of hardness. Hardness in nature is immense energy, but acting in a very concentrated space, restricted space, but going to beat hell. That's why you can't get through it. Now, from those very tiny fast rhythms, which give us the impression of continuity, there are also in this universe immensely slow rhythms. And these are very difficult for us to keep track of. And they impress us and depress us as our own life and death, as our coming and going, which goes for what is, to us, such a slow pace that we can't possibly believe that it is really a rhythm. We think of it as our birth, as something quite unique that could never occur again, because we're so close to it, you see, and it's moving so slowly. And so with that point of view, we are, like Marshall McLuhan said, he borrowed a metaphor from me, which is that we are driving a car looking at the rear vision mirror. That means that the environment in which you believe yourself to exist is always a past one. It isn't the one you're actually in. The process of growth, the basic process of biology, is one in which lower orders are always being superseded by higher orders. But the lower order can never figure out, or only very rarely figure out, what the higher order is that's taking over. And may see it as a terrible threat, as total disaster, as the very end. But therefore can never be aware that the principle of growth always has and always will continue. Whereas that's what's going on. But you never know what the next step is going to be, because if you did know, you wouldn't take it, because it would already be past. Do you understand this? That any certainly known future is an event of which we can say, you've had it. And in that sense, it's past. When we play games, and we say in chess or in bridge or whatever game you're playing, the outcome of the game becomes certain. We at that point cancel the game and begin a new one. Because the whole zest of the thing, which takes me back to the idea that this whole thing is a hide and seek game, is that you don't know what the next order coming up is. But one thing you can be sure of, it will be an order, and it will comprehend you. At the moment, we stand at a time in history where we're beginning to think of the great countdown on the end of the human race. Terrifying possibility that through atomic energy, we may obliterate this planet and turn the whole globe into a star. Maybe that's the way all the stars started. Imagine, you know, this great thing coming up. The countdown on the end. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You sit on the seashore, and you hear the waves going in and out, and you don't stop to think. That's what you're doing. That's what the whole business is doing. There'll be places where the wave mounts and mounts and it gets too big for its boots or whatever, and it explodes and breaks. We do the business. But very important to realize that that's what you're doing, because then you don't get panicky. Most of you never press that button. But if you realize that that's what it is, it doesn't really matter if you don't do it. Then there's a chance that it won't do it. That's the only chance we have. Not to do this thing which attracts us like a kind of vertigo, like a person who looks over a precipice and is all set to throw himself over. Or a person who jumps out of a plane when they're skydiving and forgets to pull the parachute ring because he gets fascinated with the target. It's called target fascination. He just goes straight at it, see? So we can get absolutely fascinated with disaster, with doom. Or, all the news in the newspapers is invariably bad news. There is no good news in the newspapers. People wouldn't buy a newspaper.
What is for loneliness being
Even
a
the free
trifle?
press is full of terrible news. Except the San Francisco Oracle. And the fascination, you see, for this doom
I will
might be
place my
neutralized if we would say, well,
Kauai, what of limb, cutting off displeasure
Not bothered
of
about
front
that.
thy foe, with the darkness is the
it's just
fountain of
another
existence.
fluctuation in this huge, marvelous, endless chain of our own selves
The
and our
one
own
who
entities.
lives mindfully sent.
See, here's the problem. Because of our myopia, because of the way we've, as it were, restricted consciousness to focus upon just that certain little area of experience that we call voluntary action. That's us. And everything else happens to us. Now, that's obviously absurd. Let's suppose you take in your hand one of those toys, a gyroscopic top. And you suddenly notice, the minute you get this in your hand, that it has a kind of vitality to it. It seems to resist you. It starts pushing you in a certain way, see? And sometimes you're with it and following it. And then sometimes you see it. It's just as if you held a living animal in your hand. You pick up a hamster, or a guinea pig. You hold this little thing in your hand, it's always trying to escape. So the gyroscope always seems to be trying to escape your hold. Now, in exactly the same way, what you're experiencing all the time, all sorts of things are getting out of control and doing things you don't expect. It's trying to escape your hold. Right? They don't grab it. And you discover that this living thing that you're feeling, like the gyroscope top, it's really alive. Because you can see, very simply, that you would not understand the experience that you call voluntary action and decision, being in control, being yourself, unless in opposition to that, there was something else. You couldn't realize self and control and will unless there was something other, out of control, and instead of will, won't. It's the two together only that produces the sensation of having a personal identity. Only there is a funny thing about human consciousness which has been worked out very carefully in the which is that our attention is captured by the figure rather than the background, by the relatively enclosed area rather than the diffuse area, and by something moving rather than what is relatively still. And to all those phenomena that in this way attract our attention, we attribute a higher degree of reality than the ones we don't know. That's only because, for the moment, those are more important. Consciousness is the window that is scanning the environment, just in the same way that the picture is the window. set of values tells us we ought to pay attention to. And so in this way, we have this rather myopic way of looking at things, and we screen out from attention anything that is not immediately a scanning system based on sense of danger. But quite obviously, you as a complete individual are much more than the scanning system. You are in relationships with the external world that on the whole are incredibly harmonious. Going back to this illustration of every living body as something like the flame of a candle, the energies of life in the form of temperature, light, air, and food, and so on, are streaming through you all at this moment in the most magnificently harmonious way. And you're, all of you, far more beautiful than any candle flame. Just sitting in these chairs, just going. No? Only we're so used to it. We say about that, so what? Should be something because it's a characteristic of consciousness that it ignores stimuli that are constant. When anything is constant, it says, okay, it's the same, it's in the bag. You need to pay attention to that. Therefore, we eliminate systematically from our awareness all the gorgeous things we do all the time. And instead, we become focused on the things that might not be so, which is all right, but we make too much of it. And we make so much of it that we identify our very selves, I, ego, with the radar, with the troubleshooter. And that's only tiny fragments of one's total being. So that if you do become aware that you are not simply that scanning mechanism, but you are your complete organism, then very swiftly, in turn, as a consequence of that, you become aware that your organism is not the way you think about it when you look at it from the standpoint of conscious attention, from the standpoint of the ego. From the standpoint of the ego, is your your friends still recognize it, but you're still putting on the same show, the same pattern. That is the recognizable individual. But we are trained in our language, the very structure of the language we talk deceives us into misunderstanding this. Because when we see a pattern, we ask, what's it made of? Like you see a table. Is it made of wood or is it made of aluminum? But then when you inquire into what is wood and how does wood differ from aluminum, The only thing a scientist can tell you is the different patterns, that is to say, the different molecular structure of the two things. And a molecular structure is not a description of what something is made of. It is a description of what dance it is performing, what motions, what kind of a symphony this is. Because basically, all phenomena of life are musical. And gold differs from lead in exactly the same way that a waltz differs from a That is a deception we get into because we have two parts of speech in our grammar. We have nouns and verbs. And verbs are supposed to describe the activities of nouns. And this is simply a convention of speech. You could have a language with only verbs in it. You don't need any nouns, or you could also have a language with the nouns only and no verbs. And it would perfectly adequately describe what's going on in the world. So if you were used to speaking with a language that had one part of speech, you could say just as much as we can with two, and be a lot clearer. Only at first it would sound awkward, but you'd soon get used to it. And then when you got used to it, it would be a matter of common sense that the patterning of the world is not some kind of stuff that's patterning. You don't have to seek for a substance underlying the whole thing, it's just patterning. And we're all that. And so in this way, there is, to a person who really wakes up, you very soon realize that your existence is not something that is just the hopeless little creature that's suddenly confronted with a great big external world that goes at him, and eats him up. Every tiniest little thing that comes into being, every minute little fruit fly or gnat or bacterium, I will go so far as to say is an event upon which this whole cosmos depends. This thing goes both ways. It's not only that every little organism which exists depends on its total environment. The reverse is also true, that the total environment depends on each and every one of those little organisms. So that you could say this universe consists of an arrangement of pattern in which every event is essential to the whole thing. Now, we screen that idea out of our consciousness in exactly the same way that we screen out the perception of space as an important reality. Just as we pay attention to the figure and ignore the background, so we see one way of looking at things, namely that the organism is very frail against the environment. It lasts a long time, the environment, but the organism only lasts a short time. What do you mean the environment lasts a long time? What does the environment consist of? Just a lot of little things. And yet there is the environment just as the same way as there is the face in the newspaper photograph behind all those little dots. When you get far enough away from it, you see the face. When you get far enough away from all the organisms and the little bits of things, you see the environment in another scale of magnification. But actually, the whole thing is arranged in a polar system where the enormous depends on the tiny depends on the enormous. And you get a relationship between these extremes, which can be called a transaction. That is to say, a transaction when there's buying and selling. It's impossible to have buying without selling and selling without buying. So you always, wherever you are looking at the general panorama of sensory experience, try switching. Try shifting your attention to all the things you thought were unimportant, to the consequence, to the background, and begin looking at the spaces between people. All painters have to learn this, because especially if you're working in oils, you actually have to paint in the background. Weavers know this, Because when they're making patterns and weaving, they've got to weave the background as well. Or if you do needlepoint with embroidery, think of the hours you spend putting in the background over the canvas in wool. And you become aware of it. Same way that people have made the great Oriental carpets. They're much more aware of the background as constituting an essential part of the total experience. So as you become aware of this, you see the same thing that you notice in music, namely that it is only as a result of hearing the interval between tones that you hear any melody. If you don't hear the interval, you're tone deaf, and all notes are the same noise. All you hear is rhythm. You don't hear any music. You've got to hear the interval. So then watch the intervals between people. The things that aren't said, the things that are tacit, the things that are implicit rather than explicit. And then you begin to get connected. Now it's very important to have a connection. And this is the way it fundamentally comes out. Of seeing the thing you forgot. You know, you can always bug people in a beautiful way, in a very helpful way, by just saying to them, what did you forget? Well, I don't know. What was I supposed to remember? Oh, I'm really not trying to put you on. I mean, it's not difficult. This is something completely obvious that you forgot. You'd easily remember it because it's so obvious. Well, that's the hardest thing in the world to think of. What's the most obvious thing I forgot? Oh, what's that? Well, who do you think you are? Well, how do you answer that question? Who are you? Well, you give a name. You say, I'm Joe Dokes, I'm Alan Watts. That's not true. That's what people told you. They put that name on you. They taught you to identify with it and to behave as it was expected to behave. But that's not who you are. You know very well. Go back in your memory. Go back into your infancy before they started telling you who was who. Who are you? And if you get with that, you know very well. Jolly old ancient of days. Only there's a conspiracy that you mustn't let on. Because everybody knows. And if one person realizes it, the others are a little bit offended. They say, well, how come you're so great? He worked it in Christianity by very cleverly, of allowing this one individual to be recognized as the God. And nobody else, therefore, could be. But since he had been safely crucified, he stuck to him. What a sacrifice. So, everybody, therefore, who gets on the and never comes out with it, even Christians, they say, who are you? Then he says, you despise me. They simply involve in something that happens. It's always something other than you. You don't recognize it as an integral part of your own being, without which you cannot know what you mean by the word I. But in the truth of the matter is, though, that if you will face it out, every single one of us knows that that isn't true. There is as it were, a recess of the soul, of the psyche, where everybody knows perfectly well that you are not just this irresponsible little mouse that's been chucked down into this world, but that you are really doing this work. You're running it. Only you can't admit it just in the same way as you can't admit that you're responsible for the way your own heart beats. You say, oh, that's not my doing. I've no control over my heart. Do you have any control over being conscious? Do you know how you will? You say, I intend to take my hand down from my face and put it in my ear. I can do that, but I don't know how the hell it's done. So that what we mean by the capacity of voluntary control in the ordinary sense of the word is that we don't understand it at all. So you might say, in a funny backwards way, that the only kind of control you really understand is that where you're not using your will.
I will place my
So
mishkan.
easy, like you open and close your hand. You know how to do it? Sure you know how to do it. But you can't put it into words and explain it to someone.
Has roots that go deep.
Say, well, come on, aren't you human? Don't you know how to open and close your hand? Just do it, silly.
I will place my
We don't realize it.
I will place my mishkan, my mashkan, literally mine. A parable. One person loved another and said, my love for you so hot. Languorous Asia, Africa glow, a whole world distant, absent, almost gone, lives aromatic forest, lingam of air. Suddenly encountering, behold, a woman, do not wed her, who is bold, restrain weak folly, or woo melancholy. It is the sun of life and light, shining through the 12 tribes of heaven, and spreading the power through the tree of life, to make all things new. And I am prince of darkness, as well as king of light. Shall there be anything wherein I, the Lord of all, had no dominion? They see crooked. Is it not written in Exodus that the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and again in Isaiah, I create both the evil and the good?
That you seem to conclude your life every time in a wipeout
The
called
innermost
death.
self of man is the jewel of eternity, or the magical stone of the wise, which gives its possessor the priceless boon of immortality. He who truly knows himself is. This thy body is the palace of the king. This thy body is the manifested world of God and man. This thy body is the seamless robe of Adonai. Apart from me there is neither wisdom nor knowledge nor understanding. Into every state of knowledge do I enter, into false knowledge as well as into true, so that I am not less the ignorance of the meditation on Aleph. I am without beginning, without end, older than night or day, younger than a babe newborn, brighter than light, darker than darkness, beyond all things and creatures, yet fixed in the heart of everyone. A seeker concentrating on mindfulness advances like a fire, consuming the chains of bondage, both great and small, a monk or lay personage. Having developed a high degree of mindfulness, rejoice in mindfulness, delighting in the domain of the noble ones. These awakened ones, dedicated. On the other hand, those who correctly perceive the essential as essential, and the non-essential as non-essential, will and feet. Mind is the forerunner of all actions. All deeds are led by mind, created by mind. If one speaks or acts with a suit, rest and unrest derive from illusion. With enlightenment there is no liking and disliking. All dualities come from ignorance. To return to the root is to find meaning,
which means
but to pursue appearances is to miss the source.
interdependent
At the moment of
of all the
for
forms
the
of
great
things
way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes
and there are
you have the option, for instance, of these are
links, shall we
he was
say,
talking about this.
in the chain of interdependent origination, constituting a circle. And the existence of the circle depends on the presence of every one of the links.
A meditation on how if I am without beginning, without end, older than night or day, younger than the babe newborn, brighter than light, darker than darkness, beyond all things and creatures, yet fixed in the heart of everyone. From me the shining worlds flow forth to me.
Of the vicious circle in which most people and beings are living.
That's where we start. I asked myself what this literally came across when it's to understand about the world.
The round of birth and death. The Bhava chakra, the wheel of Bhava which is becoming. And so going round and round and round in the endless game of hide and seek is from one point of view bondage. Bondage to karma. And if you study the Bhagavad Gita, which is not a Buddhist book but a Hindu scripture, Krishna,
the meditation on how if I am without
explains that the wise man is one who does what is called nishkama karma, nishkama, Nishkama, meaning passionless activity, in the sense that he acts without seeking a result, without being motivated by the fruits of action, and therefore is not bound by his own action. You can be bound to samsara, the wheel of birth and death, by iron chains or gold chains. The chains are, I'm talking in more or less the language of popular Hinduism, that if you do bad deeds in this life, you will get bad result next time. If you do good deeds in this life, you may be reborn as an angel or as a monk, in which you get a better chance of liberation. But still, so long as you're looking for results, be they good or evil, you're still bound. Now, the way in which one becomes, as it were, free of karma involves another Buddhist point of view, which is a kind of a different way of looking at the chain of interdependent origination. It's the way which the Japanese call jijimuge. That is to say, the mutual interpenetration of all things independent. So that you could say that actually, in fact, the